However long the night, the dawn will break. But not every sunrise finds the same people waiting. Yoruba proverb, she almost missed the call. That is the thing. Nobody tells you about the moment your life begins to fall apart. It rarely arrives with thunder. It arrives quietly, in the shape of a phone screen, lighting up on a busy counter surrounded by bolts of Ankara fabric and the noise of a market that never truly sleeps. It arrives while you are smiling at a customer, while your hands are moving with the practiced confidence of a woman who has worked too hard, for too long, to slow down. Now it arrives and you almost let it go to voicemail because you are in the middle of closing the biggest deal of your career. Although I almost let it go. She did not. She picked it up, and the voice on the other end was not her daughter's. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Chiamaka, speaking in that careful, lowered tone that people use when they are trying to deliver news without causing a scene in public. Adaeze is not here. She left this morning with her bag, a big one, for 3 seconds. Adaeze stood completely still among the bolts of fabric and the noise of Balogun Market in Lagos, Nigeria, on the afternoon of what should have been the greatest day of her professional life. The purchase order she had been waiting 18 months for was signed. And sitting in her bag, her Ankara designs were going to be stocked in a boutique in Victoria Island. She had done it. She had actually done it. And her 17-year-old daughter had packed a bag and walked out the door later. When Adaeze would tell this story to women who sat across from her with tired eyes and ambitious hearts, she would always begin at this moment. Not at the beginning, not at the success, not even at the loss, but at the 3 seconds of stillness. When the world asked her a question, she was not prepared to answer, "What did you miss while you were building everything you wanted?" This is that story. Adaeze Nkechi Obi was born the second daughter of a seamstress in Onitsha, Anambra State. Her mother, a small woman with enormous hands and an even more enormous, will ran a tailoring shop from the front room of their home for 31 years. Adaeze grew up breathing the smell of starch and thread, watching her mother hold pins between her lips while she measured and cut and stitched the clothes that dressed half the neighborhood for weddings, funerals, and church. On Sundays, she did not inherit her mother's patience with the needle, but she inherited something else, her mother's eye. The ability to look at a length of fabric and see not cloth, but possibility. Not color, but conversation. Not pattern, but power. When Adaeze was 12 years old, her mother spread a new bolt of asoke on the cutting table and asked her what she saw. Every other child in the room said. Blue Adaeze said, "I see a woman walking into a room," and everyone turning to look. Her mother laughed so hard she had to sit down. That was the beginning, though. No one knew it. Yet, she moved to Lagos at 23, the year after her mother died, carrying 3 things: a small suitcase, a notebook full of fabric sketches, and the particular kind of grief that comes from losing the person who believed in you before you believed in yourself. She got a small stall at the edge of Balogun Market, selling ready-cut Ankara prints she sourced from a supplier in Kano. The stall was barely large enough to turn around in the rainy season. Water crept under the door and stained the bottom bolts. In the dry season, the heat turned the space into something close to a furnace. She sold fabric from that stall for 4 years. She saved carefully. She learned the market, learned the buyers, learned the language of supply and demand that no school ever teaches. But Lagos will absolutely educate you in, usually at your own expense. Then at 27, she met Daniel Obi at a trade fair in Ikeja. He was an engineer, he was funny, he had the kind of eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and she decided within 3 hours of knowing him that she was going to marry him. She did the following year. 3 years into the marriage, Zara was born 3 years after Zara. Daniel was gone, not in the dramatic way of the stories. People tell no affair, no fight that split the walls of the apartment. He died a road accident on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway on a Tuesday morning in October. On his way to a site inspection, Adaeze was 33 years old. Zara was 3. There was a small life insurance payout, to enough to keep them afloat for 8 months if she was careful. She was careful, she was more than careful, she was ferocious. She went back to the market the week after the burial. Her mother-in-law, a large woman from Ori, who communicated primarily through meaningful silences and the strategic placement of food, told her she should grieve properly, to let family help Adaeze, understood what the woman meant, and she was not ungrateful. But she had watched her own mother walk through grief with her hands, and she understood in the deep, wordless way that daughters carry their mother's knowledge that for some women, stillness was not healing, and stillness was drowning with better posture. She went back to the market for the next 3 years. Adaeze rebuilt. She expanded the stall. She began designing her own prints, working with a small textile printer in Kaduna, who could produce her original patterns on Ankara-based fabric at a price that made sense. She hired a young woman named Blessing Easy, who was 22 years old, endlessly energetic, and had an opinion about everything, most of which were correct. Blessing was from Enugu and had come to Lagos, the way many young people come to Lagos, with more confidence than experience, more hustle than plan, and the unshakable belief that the city owed her a future. She was wrong about the city owing her anything. She was right about the future. She became Adaeze's right hand at the stall, then her business partner in all but name. Then, something closer to a sister than an employee. It was Blessing who first noticed the sign above the stall of an old woman 3 rows down. A hand-painted board that read Mrs. Okonkwo Fine Fabrics since 1974. Mama Okonkwo has been here since before either of us was born, Blessing said one afternoon, eating chin-chin from a paper bag, and watching the old woman work with the slow, precise movements of someone who has never wasted a single motion in her life. She's seen everything. She's seen people come, and she's seen people go. Adaeze barely looked up from her ledger. And then she's seen enough. Blessing gave her a long sideways look. You should talk to her sometime. Adaeze did not for a long time. She was too busy. There was always something. A supplier issue, a new design, a customer complaint, the perpetual arithmetic of a small business that lives or dies by the decisions of one tired woman who cannot afford to get things wrong. Zara was growing up in the apartment in Surulere, watched by a succession of housekeepers and neighbors. And increasingly herself, she was a serious child, quiet in the way that gets misread as shyness, caused by people who do not look closely enough. She was not shy. She was watching. She had her father's eyes, the kind that crinkled at the corners, and her mother's jaw set like stone when she had made up her mind about something. She read constantly. She kept a journal that she hid under the mattress, and which Adaeze had never read, though she knew it was there. On the evenings, when Adaeze came home, before Zara's bedtime, they would sit together at the kitchen table, and Zara would show her drawings or tell her about school. Adaeze would listen with her whole body, the way exhausted women learn to do, completely present for 20 minutes, and then simply out of fuel, she would kiss Zara's forehead. She would say, "You are my reason." She meant it completely. She also went back to her ledger. After the years moved, Zara turned 10, then 12, then 14. The store became a proper shop. The shop became a small studio where Adaeze designed collections under the name Adelux Fabrics, Ankara and Aso oak pieces with a modern edge, the kind of fabric that women in Lagos bought when they wanted to walk into a room and make a statement without opening their mouths. The brand got a small feature in a lifestyle magazine. Orders came in from customers in Abuja and Port Harcourt. A boutique owner in Victoria Island reached out. The world was opening, and Blessing watched all of this and felt something she could not quite name: pride. Yes, excitement, absolutely, but also a small cold worry that sat at the back of her chest, like a stone. She could not dislodge. She first said something directly to Adaeze on a Thursday evening when they were closing the studio, sweeping fabric, scraps off the floor, and stacking bolts back on shelves. Zara was 15 by then, Ada. Blessing said carefully, using the shortened name she only used when she was being serious. "When did you last take Zara out? Just the two of you, not for an errand." "Not quickly." Adaeze did not answer immediately. She was counting bolts of a new print, moving her lips slightly. "Blessing, I provide for her. She has a good school, good food, Everything she needs. I know you provide blessings. Stopped sweeping. I am not asking about providing. I am asking about presence. The word landed in the room between them. And neither woman spoke for a moment. She's fine, Adaeze said. Her voice was not unkind. It was the voice of a woman who has had this fear before and has learned to fold it and put it away somewhere. She will not trip over it. She understands what I am building. She knows it is for her. Does she know that blessing? Asked. Or do you just know that? Adele set down the bowl she was holding and looked at her friend. There was no anger in the look. There was something worse than anger. The expression of a person who has heard a truth. They are not ready to receive, which is not the same as a person who has not heard it. To the Victoria Island deal is almost closed. Adaeze said, after that, things will slow down and I will have more time. Blessing looked at her for one more moment. Then she picked up her broom and continued sweeping. She did not say what she was thinking. After, which was, there is always an after that. The after that never comes. Instead, she said nothing. Because she was blessing and she knew Adaeze, and she understood that some lessons can only be learned by leaving them. She would remember this conversation for the rest of her life. 3 months after that Thursday evening, Mrs. Okonkwo, from 3 rows down, who stopped at the door of Ada Lux Fabrics one afternoon. She was a small woman which surprised people who had only heard about her. Because the reputation of Mrs. Okonkwo was not a small reputation. She was 71 years old, had been in Balugan Market since she was a young woman, had buried 1 husband and outlasted 2 recessions, and raised 4 children in a market stall before she had a shop. And she wore all of this not as weight, but as a kind of quiet authority that made younger women straighten up without knowing why. She looked at the shop. She looked at the display of Ankara in the window. And she looked at Adaeze. Your mother was a seamstress. She said it was not a question. Adaeze was startled. Yes, in Onitsha. How did you the way you hold fabric, Mrs. Okonkwo said. People who learn fabric from books hold it like a business. People who learned it from their mothers hold it like a memory. She paused. Your designs are beautiful. You are building something real. Thank you, Ma, Adaeze said, genuinely moved Mrs. Okonkwo looked at her a moment longer. You have a daughter? Yes, Zara. She is 15. The old woman was quiet for a bit, and her eyes moved around the shop, the bolts, the sketches pinned to the wall, the order book open on the counter. The general evidence of a woman who lived inside her work. There is a Yoruba saying, Mrs. Okonkwo said, a mother is the backbone of the home, but a backbone that never bends will eventually snap. She looked at Adaeze steadily. Do not be so strong that your daughter cannot reach you. Then she nodded once the way elders nod, when they have said what needed to be said, and walked back down the road toward her own shop. Adaeze stood for a long time in the doorway, watching her go. She thought about it that evening on the bus home. She thought about it as she put her key in the door. She walked in, and the apartment was quiet, and she told herself, Zara was probably in her room studying. She put her bag down on the table. She noticed that the kitchen was dark. She noticed that there was no light under Zara's door. She knocked, no answer. She opened the door, and Zara was sitting on the bed with her knees drawn up and a book open in her lap that she was clearly not reading. She looked up at her mother, and her expression was the expression of a person who has been waiting for something for a very long time and has recently stopped expecting it to arrive. How was school? Adaeze asked. Fine, Zara said. Did you eat? Yes. Adaeze stood in the doorway for a moment. Something was wrong. She could feel it the way a mother feels it. Not in any single thing, but in the accumulated weight of everything, in the specific texture of her daughter's monosyllables. In the way Zara's eyes moved back to the book, she was not reading. Are you all right? Adaeze asked. I'm fine, Mom. She should have gone in and sat down. She should have closed the book and taken her daughter's hands and said, I see you. I am here. Tell me what is in your heart. Instead, she said, okay, get some sleep. The exam is on Friday, and she closed the door. She has never fully forgiven herself for closing that door. The Victoria Island deal closed 3 months later. It was a Friday. Adaeze was at the studio when the email came in with the signed purchase order, and Blessing looked at her face and started screaming. Before Adaeze had even said anything, because Blessing had been waiting for this moment alongside her for 18 months. And the look on Adaeze's face said everything. They held each other in the middle of the studio and laughed until they were crying. And Adaeze thought, I did it, Mama, I did it. This is what I have been working for. She was reaching for her phone to call Zara, when her other phone, the personal one she often left face down on the counter, lit up with Mrs. Chiamaka's number. She picked it up. Adaeze, Zara is not here. She left this morning with a bag. A big one. The studio sounds dropped away. And the celebration dropped away. Everything dropped away. And she was standing in a silence that had nothing to do with sound. What? Her voice came out very calm. Calm in the way that is not calm, but is what happens to your voice when your heart has gone very cold. I saw her leave around 10. I thought she was going to school, but she had a big travel bag, the blue one. I knocked your door to ask. But no one answered. I have been calling your line, but Adaeze was already moving. She grabbed her bag. Blessing was watching her face. Go. Blessing said immediately, though Adaeze had not explained anything. Go. Now, I will handle everything here. And the bus ride back too. Surulere took 45 minutes through Lagos traffic. Adaeze sat in the back seat and called Zara 7 times. Each call went to voicemail. She called Zara's school friends, 3 of them the ones she had numbers for, which she realized with a sick lurch was only 3, which meant she only knew 3 of her 17-year-old daughter's friends, by name and number, which meant she knew less than she thought she did. The first 2 girls said they hadn't seen Zara. The third, a girl named Tammy, paused in a way that told Adaeze she was deciding something. Tammy Adaeze said, Please, I am not calling to punish anyone. I just need to know. She's safe? Tammy exhaled. She went to her aunt in Ibadan. Auntie Chima, she said she needed time away. Adaeze closed her eyes. Kioma was her late husband, Daniel's sister. They were not close, not unfriendly. But the relationship had the particular careful distance of in-laws who genuinely like each other but have never had a reason to become truly close. Chioma lived in Ibadan, about an hour and a half from Lagos, by road, and worked as a secondary school vice principal. She was a serious, principled woman who would not be easily charmed or maneuvered, which meant Adaeze could not simply call and ask her to send Zara back. She called Chioma. Chioma picked up on the second ring. She is safe. Chioma said before, Adaeze could ask. She arrived about 2 hours ago. She is safe and she is calm. Adaeze exhaled. I'm coming, Adaeze. Chioma's voice was measured. Give her today, come tomorrow morning. And she's not running away. She's asking for space. There is a difference. She's 17. She's 17 and she's heartbroken. And she has been heartbroken for a long time. A pause come tomorrow. I will be here. She will be here. Adaeze sat on the bus in Lagos traffic and pressed her free hand flat against her thigh to stop it shaking around her. The city continued being the city, noise and color, and the relentless forward motion of 9 million people all trying to get somewhere. She went home. She sat at the kitchen table. She did not touch the order book. She had brought home out of habit. She sat and looked at the apartment that she had worked so hard to improve. The new couch, the curtains Zara had helped her choose 2 years ago. When things were better, the framed photo on the wall of herself and Zara at Taco Bay Beach. When Zara was 9, the last holiday they had taken together, she tried to remember the last time they had laughed together. Not smiled, not said pleasant things over dinner, but genuinely laughed, that full helpless falling into each other. Laughter. That is the private language of mothers and daughters who are still finding each other, still building the relationship that nobody hands you finished. She tried to remember, and she could not find it recently. She had to go back further than she expected. She had to go back further than she was comfortable with. And she got up and walked to Zara's room. And this time, she went all the way in. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the room, the books arranged by color on the shelf, the small cork board above the desk where Zara had pinned things that mattered to her, magazine cutouts, and a photograph, and a printed quote, and a small handmade card that when Adaeze looked more closely, I had her own handwriting on it. She got up and took it from the corkboard. It was a birthday card. Zara's 14th birthday. Adaeze had written inside you, "Are my reason for everything. I see you, my love, always." Adaeze stood holding the card for a long time. Then she sat back down on the bed and she did something she had not allowed herself to do fully. Since Daniel died, she folded forward and she cried. Not the controlled, productive crying that releases pressure and lets you return to work. She cried the way the body insists on crying, when it has been overruled too many times. The crying that does not ask permission and does not schedule itself conveniently, that comes from somewhere below the level where you manage things. She cried for Daniel, who should have been here. She cried for the 3 seconds of stillness in the market, when she had almost let the call go to voicemail. She cried for every closed door and every fine and every after that never came. She cried for the mother she had been trying to become, and the mother she had actually been, and for the distance between those two women, which was not as far as a disaster, but was far enough that her daughter had packed a blue bag on a Friday morning and walked out the door. She cried until she was empty, then she washed her face and went to the kitchen and made herself a cup of tea and called Blessing. "How bad is it?" Blessing asked. She went to Ibadan. To Chima. Blessing was quiet for a moment. Then "She has been trying to tell you something for a long time. Ada, I know I tried to tell you too. I know that." Also a pause. "What will you do? I am going tomorrow. I need to hear what she has to say." All of it, her voice was steady. Now the crying had done its work, and I need to not defend myself. I need to just listen. Blessing exhaled. "That is the right thing. That is the hard thing. But it is the right thing. I am aware those are the same thing." A short, sad laugh on the other end. "Call me when you are back." Adaeze drove to Ibadan the next morning, leaving Lagos at 6 to beat the worst of the traffic. The road was clear in the early light, the landscape opening up as she left the city behind, the air a little easier to breathe. She listened to nothing the whole way, and she did not want music or radio or podcast or any of the noise she usually used to fill the silence of her own head. She drove, and she let herself think. She thought about her mother, about the way her mother had worked. Not frantically, not in a way that left the children standing at the margins of her attention. She had worked with them inside her work as much as was possible. Little Adaeze had sat on a stool in the corner of the tailoring shop, doing homework while her mother cut and stitched. And she had felt in that arrangement both seen and trusted. Seen because she was there, trusted because she was allowed to be there without being managed. Adaeze had not brought Zara inside her work. She had left Zara outside it. In a well-furnished apartment with a good school and enough food and a succession of housekeepers and the knowledge, second-hand, theoretical, meaning that her mother was building something for her. This is what she was turning over as she drove. In the difference between telling your child, "I am doing this for you," and showing your child, "I am doing this with you." She arrived at Chuma's house in a quiet neighborhood in Bodija at 8:30. It was a modest compound, well-kept, with a small garden that had clearly been cared for over many years. A dog of indeterminate breed lay in the shade of a neem tree and regarded her arrival with philosophical disinterest. Choma opened the gate. She was a tall woman in her late 40s, with the kind of composed, careful face that comes from spending years managing young people. In difficult situations, she looked at Adaeze without judgment, which was more generous than it might have been. She slept well, Choma said. She was exhausted. "I think she has been carrying a lot. Can I see her? She knows you are coming." She said yes. Choma paused. Adaeze going there, ready to listen. Not to explain, not to justify, just listen. Adaeze nodded. "That is what I intend." Choma studied her for a moment. Then she stepped aside and LED her in. Zara was sitting at the small table in the garden at the back of the house with a cup of tea and a notebook open in front of her. And she looked up. When Adaeze came through the back door, she looked older than 17. She looked, Adaeze thought, with a physical shock of recognition. Like Daniel. The stillness of him. the particular quality of his patience, which was never passive, but was always watchful. Adaeze sat down across from her. Neither of them spoke. For a moment, the garden sounds filled the space between them. Birds, a distant motorbike, the dog settling in the grass somewhere behind Adaeze. "I'm not angry," Zara said finally. Her voice was quiet. "I want you to know that I didn't leave because I was angry. Then tell me why," Adaeze said. Zara looked down at the notebook. Her hands were wrapped around the cup. "You signed the Victoria Island deal." "Yes, that is what you have been working for all this time. Since I was 14, at least probably longer." A pause. "I heard you on the phone sometimes talking about it. I heard you and Auntie Blessing in the studio when I came to visit. I knew how much it meant Adaeze was quiet. I kept thinking," Zara continued, "that when it happened you would come home and we would celebrate together. And the way you used to talk about, when I was small, you used to say, 'One day we will have reasons to celebrate me and you, we will have a big party.' Do you remember?" "I remember," Ada said, "but then it happened." Zara's voice did not break, it stayed level, in the way of someone who has already cried out the breaks and is now speaking from the other side of them. "And I waited that Friday afternoon, and you didn't come. And then Mrs. Chiamaka called you. And I don't know what happened after that, but I was already at Ibadan Road by then." And she looked up. "It was not about the celebration. It was about realizing that I had been waiting for you for 3 years, and you never really arrived. The deal closed. And the first person who told you about it, it wasn't me. It wasn't going to be me. I wasn't even on the list." The words entered Adaeze like water into a wound. Not because they were cruel. They were not cruel. They were careful, measured, honest. They were exactly the kind of truth that a person has been preparing to say for a long time. That she has turned over and refined until the edges are smooth, but the core is still hard. Adaeze did not defend herself. "You are right," she said. Zara looked at her. "I have been absent," Adaeze said, "not completely, not in the physical sense, but in the way that matters. I have been absent in the way that counts. And I told myself every time that I was doing it for you, that every sacrifice was for your future. And I believe that I still believe it in one part." But she stopped, started again, "But I used it as an excuse too. I used your future as a reason not to be present in your present. And that was wrong. I knew it, and I chose not to look at it directly." Zara was watching her. Her expression had shifted, the careful control of it had softened slightly, not into crying, but into something more uncertain, more open. "I lost your father," Adaeze said, "and after that I was terrified of poverty, of losing the apartment, of you growing up with nothing, and I poured all of that terror into work, because work was something I could control. When nothing else was, that is the truth of it." She looked at her daughter steadily. "It does not justify the closed doors. It does not justify being a name you called when you needed to tell someone something wonderful. It explains it. But explanation and justification are not the same thing. The garden was quiet. Daddy used to say that." Zara said, "After a while, the difference between explanation and justification, I know I learned it from him." A long pause. Then Zara said very quietly, "I miss him. I miss him too every day." Another silence. But this one had a different quality. It was not the silence of distance. It was the silence of two people sitting on the same side of something. "I don't want you to stop working," Zara said. "I want you to know that I am proud of what you've built. I know what it cost. I am not asking you to give it up. I know I just want—" She stopped, tried again. "I just want to be inside it. With you. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but when you talk about the fabric, about the designs, about the clients, I want to know those things. I want to be someone you call when something good happens. I want to be the person who knows Adaeze reached across the table and put her hand over her daughter's." "You are the person who knows," she said. "You have always been that person." Just a long breath. I forgot to act like it. They sat in the garden for 2 hours. Adaeze asked questions and listened, and did not manage the conversation toward comfort or resolution. She let it go where it went into things that were difficult to hear, into memories of nights. Zara had been alone into a particular parent-teacher meeting When Adaeze had sent the housekeeper instead of coming herself, and Zara had stood in the corridor of the school, feeling invisible. Into a birthday when Adaeze had come home late and apologetic, and Zara had eaten her birthday rice alone at the kitchen table at 7 in the evening. Adaeze heard all of it. She did not minimize any of it. At one point, Chioma brought out a tray of food without being asked, setting it between them and disappearing. Without a word, it was the act of a woman who understood that the best thing you can do for difficult conversations is feed the people having them and get out of the way. By the time Adaeze drove back to Lagos that afternoon, nothing had been resolved in the neat sense of the word. There were no promises that could be made and automatically kept. There was no arrangement that could be signed like a purchase order and filed away. There was only the agreement to begin again differently, more honestly. And there was the commitment Adaeze made to herself in the car, in the space of her own head, where she was completely honest in a way she sometimes was not elsewhere. She would bring Zara inside the work, not as a child being indulged, but as a young woman being trusted the fabric, the designs, the shop, the studio. These were not her escape from motherhood. They were the substance of her life, and Zara deserved to know the substance of her mother's life. She stopped at Mrs. Okonkwo's shop on her way through Balogun Market. The following Monday, the old woman was sitting behind her counter, doing what she always seemed to be doing, folding fabric with the slow precision of someone who knows that the fabric will outlast the rush. She looked up when Adaeze came in. "Madam Adaeze," she said, with a slight emphasis of a woman who has been expecting a visit and is not surprised by its timing. My Adaeze sat in the plastic chair across the counter. "I want to tell you something." Mrs. Okonkwo folded a length of deep green aso oke, smoothing the edges. "Tell me," Adaeze told her, "about the blue bag and the bus to Ibadan and the garden in Bodija." She told her about what Zara had said and what she herself had said, and the 2 hours of difficult, necessary conversation. She told her all of it without dressing it up. Mrs. Okonkwo listened the way very old, very wise women listened, completely without advice, hovering already in their mouth, without the restless energy of someone waiting for their turn to speak. When Adaeze finished, the old woman was quiet for a moment. "My first husband," Mrs. Okonkwo said, "finally used to say that a farmer who plants and never goes back to check the soil is not a farmer. She is just a person who throws seeds." She looked at Adaeze. "You are not a person who throws seeds, but you forgot to go back to check." "I forgot." Adaeze agreed. "You remembered. That is what matters now." The old woman paused. "What will you do differently?" "I am bringing her into the business, and not as labor. She is going to university in 2 years. Her studies come first, but on Saturdays, if she wants, she comes with me till she sees the orders, the clients, the problems, and the solutions. She knows the real shape of what I do." Mrs. Okonkwo nodded slowly, and she agreed to this. She was the one who suggested it. She said she wanted to know. It's a pause when she said that. "I thought about how I used to sit in my mother's tailoring shop in Onitsha, and I understood something I did not know. I was being raised in that shop. I thought I was just sitting there while Mama worked, but I was being raised. I was being taught by proximity." The old woman smiled. It was not a large smile, but it was complete. "There you are," she said softly. "There is your mother's daughter." Adaeze looked at her. There was something in the old woman's tone, recognition perhaps, or the particular satisfaction of someone who has seen the long arc of things and is watching a piece of it come around. "How are you watching?" Adaeze asked, slightly surprised. "I watch everyone," Mrs. Okonkwo said simply. "I have been in this market for 47 years. Watching is how you know who will make it and who will break." A pause. "I told you not to let your backbone snap. You bent. That is the difference." Adaeze was quiet. "Then you could have said more earlier." Mrs. Okonkwo folded another length of fabric. "If I had said more, would you have heard it?" A long pause. "No," Adaeze said honestly. "Then I said exactly enough." The following Saturday, Zara came to the studio for the first time. Not as a visitor, but as someone who was meant to be there. She wore a yellow dress and had her notebook under her arm, the same kind of habit her mother had. Adaeze. noticed the reaching for a notebook to organize the world. She stood in the middle of the studio and looked around at the bolts and samples, and the orders pinned to the board and the sketches Adaeze had been working on, and her expression was the expression of someone who has been handed a key to a room. They have been standing outside for a long time. "Where do I start?" she asked. "Come look at this," Adaeze said, and she spread a length of new Ankara on the cutting table. A print she was designing for the next season, deep indigo and gold, a pattern she was trying to resolve. "Tell me what you see." Zara looked at it for a long time. She tilted her head, she walked around the table and looked from the other direction. Then she looked up. "I see a woman walking into a room," she said, and everyone turning to look. Adaeze stared at her. It was so exact, so precisely the words she herself had said at 12 years old, in her mother's tailoring shop in Onitsha, that for a moment she could not speak the fabric and the studio fell away. And she was standing in 2 times, simultaneously a child in Onitsha, speaking into her mother's laughing face, and a woman in Lagos watching her daughter speak with her mother's eye. Then she laughed, not the controlled kind, the full helpless kind, the kind that is the private language of mothers and daughters who are finding each other. Zara stared at her. "What? Is that wrong?" "No." "Ada is managed." "No, my love. That is the most right thing anyone has ever said." She did not explain why some things are better carried than explained. The months that followed were not perfect. Nothing is the purchase order from Victoria Island turned out to be more complicated to fulfill than expected. And there were weeks when Adaeze was at the studio late and Zara was at home studying, and the old patterns tried to reassert themselves. There were moments of friction evenings when Zara was quiet in the way that still worried Adaeze, and Adaeze was learning not gracefully, not all at once, but in the uneven incremental way that real learning works, to ask directly, to knock and go in, to say, "You are quiet. Tell me what is on your mind." Sometimes Zara said, "Nothing is wrong, Mom. I am just tired." Sometimes she opened the notebook and read Adaeze something she had written, and they talked for an hour blessing. Watching all of this from the side position of someone who loves both people involved, felt the cold stone in her chest slowly dissolve one evening. As the two of them were closing the studio and Zara was in the back sweeping, she had taken to sweeping at close of day. With the same cheerful authority with which she took on most things blessing, stood beside Adaeze at counter and said quietly, "You were worth the fight." Adaeze looked at her. "She fought for you." Blessing said that is what the blue bag was. A fight she could have just drifted away. Instead, she made a big move that forced you to come to her. A pause, some children give up. She didn't. Adaeze thought about this for a long time. Afterward, she thought about it in the way you think about things, that reframe what you thought you understood. She had been thinking of Zara's departure as a wound, something that happened to her, a consequence of her failures, and it was that. But it was also, as Blessing said, an act of love in the form of a demand. Zara had been 14 when she stopped talking fully. She had been 15 and 16 and 17. Growing more quietly insistent, more carefully distant, trying in the only ways available to her to say, "I need you to see me, I need you to turn around." And finally, at 17, she had done the one thing that she knew her mother could not ignore. There is a particular kind of courage in that, in the decision to make one last unmistakable move toward the person you love. Instead of simply walking away, Adaeze had been the recipient of her daughter's courage, and she understood that it was not something she was owed. It was something she had been given a year after the day. With the blue bag, Ada Lux Fabrics expanded a second studio space, a small showroom in Lekki. The boutique in Victoria Island had reordered 3 times. 2 more boutiques had come on board, one in Abuja and one in Port Harcourt. Adaeze was not rich in the way of the truly wealthy, but she was stable and growing, and stability and growth after what she had come through felt on good days like extraordinary abundance. Zara turned 18 and received admission to study architecture at the University of Lagos, which delighted Adaeze in ways that she could not fully explain, except that it felt like continuity. Her mother's hands on fabric her own eye for structure and design, and now her daughter choosing to build the shapes of the world on the evening of Zara's acceptance. They sat on the small balcony of the apartment in Surulere they had not. Adaeze was saving for the lake house that was still a plan on paper, and drank cold zobo, and watched the Lego sky do the thing it does sometimes in the evenings, turning colors that seem too bright to be real. Orange and gold, and a shade of deep rose that has no name. Tell me something, Zara said. What? Tell me about the day you decided to start the very first day at the market. Adaeze told her. She told her about the suitcase and the notebook and the grief and the small stall at the edge of Balogun Market. With the water coming under the door in rainy season, she told her about the hard years and the years of learning, and the first time she saw her own print come off the machine in Kaduna and understood that she had made something that had not existed before she made it. Zara listened with her knees pulled up and her zobo in both hands the way she had listened as a small child. With her whole self, were you scared? Zara asked constantly, but you did it anyway. I did it anyway. And also for the wrong reasons sometimes, and in the wrong way, sometimes both things are true. A pause, you will do the same. Whatever you build, you will do it right and wrong simultaneously, and you will have to figure out the difference as you go. That is not failure. That is just how it is done. Zara was quiet. Then I want to design houses that feel like being held. That is what I keep thinking about. Not just beautiful buildings. Buildings that feel safe. Like home is supposed to feel. Adaeze looked at her daughter then. That is exactly what you should build. She said the Lego sky finished its unlikely display and deepened into its night version orange glow from 1,000 buildings, the hum and press of the city that never fully sleeps. Below the balcony, a woman was selling suya from a cart, the smell of spiced meat and charcoal drifting up in the warm air. Children were running somewhere nearby, their laughter bouncing off concrete and coming up to them in fragments. Adaeze thought of Mrs. Okonkwo. She thought of her mother in Onitsha. She thought of the distance and the nearness between things that are separated by time, but connected by something underneath it. Some thread that runs through the generations, that is neither blood exactly, nor memory exactly, but some combination of both. She thought of the blue bag and the 3 seconds of stillness in Balogun Market, and what she had almost missed. She thought of the proverb, however long the night the dawn will break. But not every sunrise finds the same people waiting. She had been lucky. She knew she had been lucky. Her daughter had chosen to wait, had chosen to fight for the thing between them rather than let it quietly die. Not every daughter does. Not every person. When they have been made to feel invisible long enough, chooses to make themselves loud. One last time, some just go. Sarah had not gone. And Adaeze had come. That in the end was the whole of it, not the Victoria Island deal, or the Lekki showroom, or the name on the boutique window. Not even the grief that had made her who she was all the years of hard labor. That had built something real from almost nothing. All of that mattered. All of that was true and earned and real. But the whole of it, the actual meaning of the thing was in the coming, in the turning, around, the driving to Ibadan at 6 in the morning. The sitting in a garden in Bodija and saying, "You are right, I was wrong. I am listening." The fabric in the window would still be there in 10 years, beautiful and precisely itself. But this was the thing that could not wait. Here is the question. Mrs. Okonkwo did not ask, but Adaeze heard anyway every time she thought of that afternoon in the old woman's shop. What are you building? And for whom? Because those are not always the same answer. And if they are not the same answer, if what you are building and who you are building it for have come apart somewhere along the way, then the building is not finished. No matter how much you have completed, the real work is not the purchase order. It is not the boutique or the studio or the name in the window. The real work is the Saturday morning with the notebook under her arm standing in the middle of your life's work and saying, "Show me where to start." And the answer you give her. So to the woman reading this, who is building something real and important and hard, build it. Do not apologize for the ambition or the sacrifice or the long hours and the closed doors that ambition requires. Your work is not the enemy of your love. But go back and check the soil. Not every day, not in a way that undermines the building, but regularly, consistently with your full attention, and not the part of your attention that is already thinking about the next order. Ask the people who depend on you, not just whether they are fine, but what they are carrying. And this is the harder part. Stop and listen to the answer. The night, however long, will break into dawn, but not every sunrise finds the same people waiting. Make sure yours does.